Most people think losing money is obvious. A bad investment, a market crash, a financial mistake you can point to, something visible, something measurable, something you can regret. But the biggest financial losses rarely look like that. They don't feel like losses, they feel like nothing, no movement, no risk, no decision, just time passing. And that's exactly the problem, because doing nothing is not neutral. It never was, and over time, it becomes one of the most expensive decisions you can make. There is a pattern most people follow without realizing it. It doesn't look like a mistake, it looks like patience, like caution, like responsibility. It sounds like, I'll wait a bit more. I need to be sure. Now is not the right moment. And in isolation, each of these thoughts feels rational, even intelligent. But repeated over years, they create something else entirely. A silent pattern of inaction. And this pattern has a cost. Not because of what you did, but because of what you didn't. Most people believe their financial life is shaped by the decisions they make, but that's incomplete, because your financial future is shaped just as much by the decisions you avoid, the investments you never make, the risks you never take, the opportunities you keep postponing. And the most dangerous part? There is no immediate feedback, no alarm, no visible loss, no emotional pain, just stability. And stability feels safe. This is where the pattern becomes invisible, because the human brain is not designed to detect losses that never happen. It reacts to pain, to failure, to mistakes. But it struggles to recognize absence, the absence of growth, the absence of movement, the absence of progress. And because of that, inaction rarely feels like a problem, it feels like control. Think about this. If you invest and lose money, you feel it immediately. There is a clear emotional response, regret, frustration, doubt. But if you don't invest, nothing happens. No loss appears on your screen, no negative feedback, no emotional reaction, just time. And time is silent. But time is not passive. Time amplifies whatever position you are in. If your money is growing, time compounds it. If your money is static, time erodes it, slowly, quietly, relentlessly. And the most dangerous part is that erosion doesn't feel like loss, because it happens in the background. This is the core of the pattern. Inaction is interpreted as safety, but in reality, inaction is exposure. Exposure to inflation. Exposure to missed compounding. Exposure to opportunity cost. And unlike a bad decision, this exposure doesn't come with a warning. It doesn't trigger fear. It doesn't force correction. It just continues. Over time, this creates a financial illusion. You feel like you are protecting your money, because you are not losing it, but you are not growing it either. And in a system where everything compounds, not growing is a form of loss, even if it doesn't look like one. Most people never question this, because the pattern is socially reinforced. Caution is praised. Patience is admired. Avoiding risk is considered responsible. And in many situations, that is true. But when caution becomes permanent, it stops being protection. It becomes paralysis. This is where the pattern shifts from behavior to identity. You are no longer someone being careful. You become someone who avoids financial decisions, someone who waits, someone who delays, someone who needs more certainty before acting. And certainty is a dangerous requirement. Because in financial systems, certainty rarely exists in advance. It only appears in hindsight. So the pattern reinforces itself. You wait for clarity. Clarity never fully comes. So you wait longer. And every time you delay, the cost increases, but you don't feel it, because nothing bad happened. And that's exactly why the pattern persists. If you lose money, you adjust. If you make a mistake, you learn. But if you do nothing, there is nothing to correct, nothing to analyze, nothing to fix. So the pattern continues unchallenged. Years pass like this, not through bad decisions, but through delayed ones, and the financial impact accumulates silently, not as visible loss, but as invisible absence. The absence of growth you should have had, and this is where most people misunderstand their financial situation. They look at their current state and think, I didn't lose money. But that's not the right question. The real question is, what should your money have become if you had acted differently? Because wealth is not only built through what you do, it is also shaped by what you postpone. And over time, postponed decisions don't disappear. They accumulate as missed opportunities, as unrealized growth, as a version of your financial life that never happened. And that version is the one that matters, because it represents the gap between where you are and where you could have been. Most people never calculate that gap, because it is uncomfortable, because it forces a different type of responsibility, not for mistakes but for hesitation. And hesitation feels justified, it feels intelligent, it feels safe, but repeated long enough, it becomes expensive. Not immediately, not dramatically, but structurally, over years, over decades, in ways that are almost impossible to recover later, because time does not only reward action, it also punishes delay. The problem with inaction is not that it feels wrong, it's that it feels right, it feels disciplined, it feels controlled, it feels like you are avoiding mistakes. And in the short term, that perception is reinforced. Nothing breaks, nothing fails, nothing goes wrong. So the behavior looks correct. But financial systems are not built on short-term feedback. They are built on accumulation. And accumulation doesn't reward comfort. It rewards positioning. Every financial decision places you somewhere, invested or not invested, exposed or inactive, growing or stagnant. There is no neutral position, even when it feels like there is. Most people think they are waiting, but waiting is not a pause. It is a position where your capital is not participating in growth, a position where time is passing without working in your favor. This is where opportunity cost begins, not as a concept, but as a real financial force. Imagine two individuals, same income, same starting point, same intelligence. The only difference? One starts investing early, the other waits. The one who starts early makes imperfect decisions, sometimes enters at the wrong time, sometimes experiences volatility, sometimes doubts their choices, but remains in motion, remains exposed, remains in the system. The one who waits feels more secure. No volatility, no uncertainty, no emotional swings, just control. For the first few years, the difference is almost invisible. Both seem fine. Both feel stable. There is no dramatic contrast. This is where the illusion becomes dangerous, because early stages do not reveal the impact of the pattern. They hide it. Compounding is not linear. It is slow at the beginning, almost irrelevant, until it isn't. After 5 years, the gap is small. After 10 years, it becomes noticeable. After 15 years, it becomes structural. Not because one person made perfect decisions, but because one person participated and the other delayed. This is the part most people underestimate. Wealth is not only a function of how well you decide, it is a function of how early you position yourself. Time is not just a duration, it is a multiplier. And when you delay entry into the system, you are not just losing time, you are losing multipliers. This is why the cost of inaction is exponential, not immediate, not visible, but compounding in reverse. Every year you wait is not just 1 year lost, it is 1 year of missed growth, plus all the future growth that year could have generated. And this is where the math becomes uncomfortable, because the difference between starting now and starting later is not small. It is massive. But the brain doesn't feel that, because the loss is abstract. It exists in a version of the future that never materializes. You don't see the money you could have had. You only see the money you currently have, and that creates a false sense of stability. I'm doing fine. I didn't lose anything. I'm being careful. But none of those statements measure the real cost, because the real cost is not visible in your current balance. It exists in your unrealized trajectory, and that trajectory is shaped by participation, not perfection. Most people wait because they want certainty, they want to avoid mistakes, They want to feel in control before they act. But financial systems don't reward certainty. They reward consistency under uncertainty. The person who acts imperfectly but consistently often outperforms the one who waits for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment rarely exists. And even when it appears, it is only obvious in hindsight. So the pattern continues. You wait for clarity, you wait for confidence, you wait for the right time. And while you wait, time keeps moving. Markets keep evolving. Opportunities keep appearing and disappearing. But you are not part of that movement. You are observing it. And observation does not generate wealth. Participation does. This is where the psychological trap becomes complete. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to act. Not because the opportunity is gone, but because the mental barrier grows. Now you are not just waiting. You are overthinking. You are analyzing. You are comparing. You are trying to optimize the decision before making it. And optimization becomes another form of delay. You tell yourself, I just need to understand this better. I'll start once I feel more confident. I don't want to make a mistake. But behind all of those statements, there is the same pattern: avoidance. Not because you are incapable, but because you are trying to eliminate uncertainty. And uncertainty cannot be eliminated. It can only be navigated. So the cost continues to grow, silently. Not because you made bad decisions, but because you didn't make enough of them. And over time, this creates a financial asymmetry between those who act early and those who delay. Not an obvious gap, not something dramatic, but something structural, something that becomes harder to close with every passing year. Because once compounding starts working for someone, it accelerates, and once you miss the early phase of compounding, catching up requires disproportionate effort, more capital, more risk, more time, all because of one pattern: inaction. And by the time most people realize this, they are not at the beginning anymore. They are years into the pattern, which makes the realization even more uncomfortable, because now the question is no longer, what should I do? It becomes, how much did I lose by waiting? And that question is the one most people avoid. At this point, most people assume the problem is financial: lack of knowledge, lack of strategy, lack of information. But that's not what sustains the pattern, because the same people who delay financial decisions are often capable of understanding them. They read, they research, they compare options. They are not uninformed, they are stuck. And the reason is not technical, it is psychological. Inaction is rarely about money, it is about perception, specifically how the brain interprets risk. Most people associate risk with action. Investing feels risky, starting feels risky, making a decision feels risky, because action creates the possibility of loss, and loss is something the brain is designed to avoid. So the mind does something subtle. It reframes inaction as safety. If you don't act, you can't be wrong. If you don't invest, you can't lose. If you don't decide, you can't regret. And that logic feels solid, even intelligent. But it is incomplete, because it only accounts for visible risk. It ignores invisible risk. The risk of staying in the same place, the risk of not growing, the risk of letting time pass without change. And this is where the pattern becomes dangerous, because the brain overweights immediate visible risk and underweights long-term invisible risk. This creates a distorted decision framework, where avoiding short-term discomfort feels more important than achieving long-term growth. So the pattern continues, not because you don't want to grow, but because you are unconsciously optimizing for comfort. And comfort is deceptive. It feels like stability, but it often hides stagnation. It feels like control, but it often masks avoidance. It feels like intelligence, but it often reflects fear. This is the second layer of the pattern. Not just inaction, but justified inaction. You don't see yourself as someone avoiding decisions. You see yourself as someone being careful. And that identity is powerful because it protects the behavior. If you believe you are being responsible, you don't question the pattern. You defend it. You explain it. You reinforce it. This is why the pattern can last for years, even decades, because it is not experienced as a problem. It is experienced as a strategy, and strategies are rarely challenged, especially when they feel safe. But safety is contextual. In a static environment, doing nothing might preserve value, but in a dynamic system, doing nothing changes your position, and financial systems are dynamic by nature. Prices change, opportunities shift, inflation erodes value, markets evolve. So even if you stay still, your relative position doesn't. You are moving, just not forward. This is the illusion. You think you are maintaining your position, but you are actually losing ground, slowly, quietly, without noticing. And because the movement is gradual, it doesn't trigger urgency. There is no moment where everything collapses, no clear signal that something is wrong, just a slow divergence between where you are and where you could be. This divergence is not dramatic at first. It starts as a small gap, almost irrelevant. But over time, it widens, because those who act accumulate, and those who delay fall behind, not because they are less capable, but because they are less exposed. Exposure is what allows growth, not certainty, not perfection, not timing. Exposure, the willingness to participate despite uncertainty. And this is where the pattern reveals its full impact. It's not just about missed opportunities, it's about identity, because the longer you remain inactive, the more that behavior defines you. You become someone who waits, someone who hesitates, someone who needs more information before acting, and that identity influences future decisions. Now every new opportunity is filtered through the same lens. Is this the right time? Am I sure about this? What if I'm wrong? And the threshold for action keeps increasing. What once required a small level of confidence now requires certainty, and certainty never arrives, so the pattern stabilizes, not as a temporary phase, but as a permanent behavior. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because now, even when the opportunity is clear, action still doesn't happen, not because the opportunity is unclear, but because the pattern is stronger. At this point, the problem is no longer financial. It is structural. A loop. Perception of risk. Avoidance, temporary comfort. Comfort, reinforcement, stronger avoidance, and the loop repeats, each cycle making it harder to break, each year increasing the cost, each decision delayed adding to the accumulation of inaction, until eventually the pattern feels normal. And what feels normal is rarely questioned. At some point the pattern becomes visible, not because something breaks, but because something is missing. You start to notice it indirectly, people around. You move forward. Opportunities you once considered are now out of reach. The gap is no longer theoretical, it is real. And this is where the discomfort appears, not as regret for a specific mistake, but as a realization. Nothing went wrong, and yet something didn't go right. This is the moment most people avoid, because it forces a different type of accountability, not for what you did, but for what you didn't do. And that is harder to process, because there is no single event to point to. No clear decision to blame, no obvious error to correct, just a pattern, repeated quietly over time. I'll start later. I'll wait a bit more. I need to be sure. Each one reasonable, each one small, each one defensible, but together they form a structure that defines your financial trajectory. This is the uncomfortable truth. Your financial life is not only shaped by your actions, it is shaped by your hesitation, and hesitation compounds, just like money. Every delayed decision adds weight to the pattern. Every missed opportunity reinforces the identity. Every year of inaction increases the distance, until the distance becomes difficult to close. This is why the cost of inaction is so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a loss. It doesn't look like a mistake. It doesn't trigger correction. It simply accumulates, silently, and by the time it becomes visible, it is already structural. This is where most people misinterpret their situation. They look at their current position and try to fix it with new decisions. More information, better strategies, smarter choices. But they are addressing the surface. Because the real problem is not the next decision. It is the pattern that delayed all previous ones, and unless that pattern is recognized, it continues. Even with better knowledge, even with better opportunities, even with better intentions, because behavior repeats, and repeated behavior defines outcomes. This is the final layer of the pattern. Inaction is not passive, it is active. It actively shapes your future. It actively limits your growth. It actively determines your financial trajectory. Every time you delay, you are deciding not to move, not to participate, not to grow. And that decision has consequences, not immediately, not visibly, but inevitably. Because financial systems do not wait. They continue moving, with or without you. And the longer you remain outside of that movement, the more expensive re-entry becomes. This is the part most people realize too late. Not that they made bad decisions, but that they didn't make enough of them. And that difference is what separates stagnation from growth. So the question is no longer, should I act? Because you are already acting through inaction. The real question is, what position are you choosing by doing nothing? Because doing nothing is not neutral. It never was. It is a decision. And over time, it becomes one of the most expensive ones you can make.